In the 16th century, Spain was the richest empire the world had ever seen, commanding mountains of literal gold and silver. In 1920, the British Empire controlled a quarter of the planet's land and people. Just a few decades ago, the Soviet Union was one of two global superpowers, armed with tens of thousands of nuclear warheads. And yet, within a single lifetime, all of them were either bankrupt, broken, or simply gone. They were not conquered by foreign invaders. They were destroyed from within by the same three economic mistakes. And now, America is making all three at once. Every great empire has believed it was special. Each one, at its absolute peak, saw its power as permanent and its destiny as obvious. The Romans, the Ottomans, the Spanish, the British, they all thought their time in the sun was not just a moment, but an eternity. Their currencies were unshakable, their armies were invincible, and their systems were superior. And they were all wrong. The story of a fallen empire is not really about barbarian hordes at the gates. That's just the final dramatic scene of a much deeper disease. The real story of collapse is written in the numbers. It's found in account books, in state treasury ledgers, and in the declining value of the money in a regular person's pocket. It's a story of fatal economic blunders, repeated so consistently throughout history that they form a clear and undeniable pattern. This is not a history lesson. It's a warning. We are going to dissect three of modern history's most powerful empires: the Spanish, the British, and the Soviet Union. On the surface, they could not be more different. A Catholic monarchy floating on New World gold, a global trading empire, and a communist state. But they all met their end for the same basic reasons. They fell into a predictable death spiral: military overspending, currency debasement, and catastrophic debt that hollowed them out from the inside until the grand facade just could not stand anymore. Today, the United States, the undisputed superpower of our time, stands at a very familiar crossroads. The parallels are not just vague historical rhymes. They are direct, quantifiable, and they are accelerating. The final warning from these three dead empires is not written in a dead language. It's in our own headlines, our own budget reports, and in the economic anxiety every American feels. The only question is whether we will read it in time. To understand Spain's fall, you have to understand its breathtaking rise. In the mid-1500s, under King Philip II, Spain was a colossus. Its territory stretched from the Philippines to the Americas. This was the original empire on which the sun never set. The Spanish Armada was the most feared navy in the world, and its armies were the gold standard in Europe. But more than anything, Spain had money. Rivers of it. From the mines of Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, a mountain literally made of silver, and the gold mines of Mexico, treasure fleets dumped unfathomable wealth onto Spanish shores. This was not wealth from production or innovation. It was wealth dug out of the ground. It seemed like a cheat code for empire, a divine blessing that made Spain invincible. And the Spanish crown believed this river of money would flow forever. That belief was the seed of their destruction. The very thing that made them rich is what would ultimately make them poor. The first symptom of the imperial disease hit immediately: military overextension. With a bottomless treasury, Spain's ambitions became limitless. Philip II saw himself as the defender of Catholicism, and he waged war on every front at once. He fought the Ottoman Empire for the Mediterranean. He fought a brutal decades-long war to crush the Protestant rebellion in the Netherlands. He fought France for control of Italy. He launched the infamous Armada against England. War became the state's main purpose. Even with all the treasure from the New World, it was not enough. The silver flowed into Spain and immediately flowed out to pay for armies and foreign mercenaries. This led to the second critical stage: currency debasement. When the silver and gold ran out, the Spanish crown did what governments are always tempted to do. It decided to just create more money, not by mining it, but by cheating. Spanish mints began mixing copper into their pure silver coins, creating a new currency called vellon. At first, it was a little, but as the wars got more expensive, the amount of copper grew. Soon, what was once a trusted silver coin became a copper coin with a deceptive silver wash. The government insisted it was worth the same, but the people knew better. Bakers and merchants began demanding more of the debased coins for the same loaf of bread. This sparked one of history's great inflationary periods, the price revolution. Spain was ground zero. The flood of American silver, combined with the debased coins, created a perfect storm where more and more money was chasing the same amount of goods. Prices skyrocketed. Between 1550 and 1650, prices in Spain quadrupled. The cost of living became crushing for the average person. The very wealth that was supposed to enrich the nation was making its people poor. As the currency failed, the state turned to the next stage, the debt spiral. To finance its wars, the Spanish crown borrowed relentlessly, using future silver shipments as collateral. But the silver that arrived was often already spent. This led to a catastrophic cycle of borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money they had already borrowed. When the cash inevitably ran out, the crown would just declare bankruptcy. Spain, the richest empire in the world, declared a series of state bankruptcies, with major defaults in 1557, 1575, and 1596. It was a doom loop from which there was no escape. This toxic mix produced the most tragic stage, the loss of productive capacity. The river of silver made Spain so rich that it did not need to make anything anymore. Why toil in a field to grow grain when you could just import it? Why build furniture when you could buy it from France? An entire culture began to look down on productive work. Spain's domestic economy hollowed out. Its once vibrant industries withered. The country became a mere pipeline for wealth. Silver arrived in Seville and flowed right back out to pay for foreign wars and foreign goods. Spain had the silver, but its rivals had the factories, the farms, and the workshops. They had the real economy. The economic rot led to social decay. As the cost of living soared and jobs vanished, Spanish society began to fray. The most ambitious and skilled citizens left for anywhere that offered a future. The empire was still vast on paper, but its core was rotting. By the mid-1600s, a weakened Spain had lost Portugal and was forced to recognize the independence of the Netherlands, the very territory it had bankrupted itself trying to keep. The empire had not been conquered by its enemies. It was poisoned by its own treasure. In the year 1920, the British Empire was the largest in human history, covering a quarter of the world's land area and governing nearly a quarter of its people. The Royal Navy ruled the waves. London was the financial capital of the world, and the pound sterling was the global reserve currency. To anyone living then, the British century seemed destined to last forever. Yet, within 35 years, the empire was all but gone, and Britain itself was on the verge of bankruptcy. Like Spain, Britain's decline began with military overextension. The cause was not a mountain of silver, but the cataclysm of two world wars. In World War I, Britain shattered its finances to win. It sold off its vast overseas investments and borrowed enormous sums, mostly from the United States. The nation that went into the war as the world's biggest creditor came out as one of its biggest debtors. For a century, the pound's strength came from its link to gold. But the wars had drained Britain's gold reserves. In 1925, Winston Churchill put the pound back on the gold standard at its old, pre-war value, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The overvalued pound made British exports too expensive. The fiction could not last. In 1931, Britain was forced off the gold standard, and the pound's value plunged. Then, just 2 decades later, it had to do it all over again. The cost of fighting World War II was the final fatal blow. The country was, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt. By 1945, Britain's national debt was more than double its entire GDP. This crushing debt forced Britain into the next stage, currency debasement. In the 19th century, Britain was the workshop of the world. But by the early 20th, it was falling behind the industrial power of the US and Germany. Instead of modernizing its factories, British capital flowed into finance and managing its empire. It became easier to manage wealth than to create it. After World War II, this decline accelerated. The nation that invented the steam engine found itself unable to compete. Its manufacturing base was slowly rusting away. This strain led to social decay. The Britain of the late 1940s was a gray, exhausted country. Despite winning the war, the people endured years of harsh austerity and rationing. The psychological blow was immense. A nation that saw itself as the master of the world was now dependent on American loans. In 1947, it had to grant independence to India, the jewel in the crown of its empire. This started a domino effect, and over the next 2 decades, the empire dissolved. The final nail in the coffin was the Suez Crisis of 1956. When Egypt nationalized the canal, Britain invaded. The military operation was a success, but the political fallout was a disaster. The United States was furious. It did not send troops. It used its new financial weapon and began selling off its holdings of British government bonds. This threatened to trigger a complete collapse of the pound. Humiliated, Britain was forced to withdraw. The lesson was brutal. The world's financial power had shifted from London to Washington. The US dollar was now king. The pound, which had been devalued to $2.80 in 1949, began a long slide. The currency that had financed global trade for a century was just another regional currency. The collapse was stunningly fast. In 1945, Britain was one of the big three. By 1965, the empire was gone. It simply could no longer afford to exist. Our third case is the most shocking of all. The Soviet Union did not have a slow decline. It was a sudden implosion. In 1985, the USSR was a global superpower. It had the largest army in history, a terrifying arsenal that peaked at around 45,000 nuclear warheads in 1986 and influenced over a third of the globe. By the end of 1991, the Soviet Union no longer existed. The Soviet story is a unique take on our theme. The first stage, military overextension, was not just a policy. It was the USSR's entire reason for being. By the 1980s, Western intelligence estimated the Soviet Union was spending a staggering 15 to 20% of its entire GDP on the military, a burden several times higher than even America's at the height of the Cold War. This money went to its massive army, to propping up client states, to a disastrous war in Afghanistan, and above all, to keeping pace with the U.S. in a high-tech arms race. This obsession exposed the system's core weakness, a total loss of productive capacity. The Soviet command economy was brutally effective at one thing, funneling every resource, the best scientists, engineers, and materials into the military. The USSR could build amazing tanks and rockets. It sent the first man into space. But it could not produce a decent amount of food to feed its own people. The civilian economy was starved. Store shelves were empty. The entire economy was hollowed out, sacrificed for military might. There was no innovation, no efficiency. The Soviet factory was designed to produce only one product, superpower status. And the cost of that product was the well-being of its people. This brings us to the Soviet version of currency debasement. The ruble was basically a work of fiction. Its value was whatever the state said it was. Outside the Soviet bloc, it was worthless. To buy anything from the West, the USSR had to pay in things the West actually wanted: gold, oil, and natural gas. The Soviet Union was, in essence, a petrostate. In the 1970s, with high oil prices, this worked. But when oil prices crashed in the 1980s, the lifeline was cut. The currency was revealed to be backed by nothing but a declining commodity. The economic failure created deep social decay. Decades of shortages and repression had created a society steeped in cynicism. Alcoholism became a national epidemic, and life expectancy for men began to decline. Almost unheard of in a developed nation at peace. No one believed in the official ideology anymore. The social fabric was unraveling. When the end came, it was an avalanche. It started when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Then the fire spread to the Soviet Union itself. When leader Mikhail Gorbachev tried to introduce reforms, he did not fix the system. He just exposed its rotten foundations. Once the fear was gone, the whole structure came crashing down. The superpower did not die in a blaze of glory. It dissolved because its economy could no longer pay for its military. Its ideology was bankrupt, and its people no longer believed. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. The stories of Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union are a roadmap of imperial decline. And when we look at the United States in 2025, the signposts on that map are chillingly familiar. The same forces that brought down those empires are at work in America today. Let's walk through the stages. First, military overextension. The United States maintains the most expensive military in world history, with over 750 military bases in at least 80 countries. The annual defense budget for fiscal year 2025 is set around $850 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined. Like Spain with its global mission and Britain with its sprawling empire, America has taken on the role of world policeman, a role that requires relentless spending. Second, currency debasement. Since 1971, when the U.S. cut the dollar's last link to gold, the currency has been a pure fiat instrument. This gives the government the magical ability to fund its spending by creating money. While it's more sophisticated than mixing copper into silver, the result is the same. Creating trillions of new dollars without a corresponding increase in goods and services erodes the value of every dollar. The proof is in your pocket. Since 1971, the U.S. dollar has lost over 90% of its domestic purchasing power. Third, the debt spiral. This is where the American parallel gets terrifying. For decades, the U.S. government has spent more than it takes in. Today, the national debt has surged to $38 trillion range. Projections show this is well over 120% of GDP. We have now reached the tipping point that past empires would recognize instantly. The annual interest payments on the national debt alone are approaching $1 trillion. America is now borrowing massive amounts of money just to pay the interest on money it has already borrowed. This is the textbook definition of a debt spiral. Fourth, the loss of productive capacity. For the last 40 years, America has outsourced its industrial base in exchange for cheaper goods. The Rust Belt is a monument to this hollowing out. Factories that made steel and electronics were shuttered and moved to Asia. America now runs massive, chronic trade deficits, importing hundreds of billions more than it exports. Like Spain, which became a pipeline for silver to flow to foreign manufacturers, America has become a pipeline for dollars to flow to foreign factories. We mistook the consumption of cheap goods for the creation of real wealth, leaving the nation critically dependent on its geopolitical rivals. Fifth, social decay. When a society's economic foundation erodes, the social fabric tears. In America today, the signs are everywhere. There's a palpable loss of faith in our institutions. Political polarization has paralyzed our ability to solve problems. We see rising social unrest, a tragic drug crisis claiming over 100,000 lives a year, and falling birth rates that signal a lack of faith in the future itself. Just like in declining Spain, we are becoming a society that is angrier, more divided, and less cohesive. Like Spain, we mistake monetary expansion for wealth. Like Britain, we are stretched thin across the globe, bearing the cost of an empire we can no longer easily afford. And like the Soviets, we are discovering that our economic foundation has deep structural cracks. The patterns are identical. The fall of a great power is never a sudden event. It is a process. It is a slow cancellation of the future. For Spain, it was a slow strangulation by inflation and debt. For Britain, It was the exhaustion that left it bankrupt and broken. For the Soviet Union, it was a sudden implosion when its brittle economy could no longer support its military. Each empire faced a moment of reckoning, a point where the cost of its ambitions exceeded its ability to pay. They financed their overreach by debasing their currency and racking up debts they could never repay, hollowing out their own economies in the process. They chose the easy path of printing and borrowing rather than the hard path of living within their means. And in the end, reality always wins. No nation in history has ever escaped the consequences. Today, America stands before the same ledger. The debts are coming due. The warnings of history are echoing louder than ever. We have followed their script with breathtaking fidelity. The fall of an empire is only a surprise to those who don't study history. The only question is, are we paying attention? If this video gave you a new perspective, subscribe for more lessons from history. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below and share with your friends.